Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Hi, Nikki. Okay, so welcome to this afternoon's class. My name is Anna, for anyone who hasn't been here before, and I've been a student of the founder of the centre, Venerable Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodin, for a long time. So today we're going to look at ideas for more peaceful living and creating a more relaxed and amiable approach to life. So transforming our mind is a comprehensive task, but the Buddha offered us so many different tools and how-to guidance to help us with that. So teachers since then have refined and ordered and enabled cultural context with a mixture of timeless and modern wisdom and examples of people who have traversed the path to great awareness and a more enlightened state. So some of these teachings, so the great paths in general, you could say it's a mixture of encouragement or carrot, and it's also a little bit of warning what might happen, a little bit of stick in terms of what might happen if we don't continue along this path. So there's a whole lot of things that invite us and encourage us with examples and stories of what can be achieved, and then others are reminders of the option of staying stuck in this kind of place. So we're going to explore some of those today, touch on some of those today, and also give some examples of some of the very inspiring teachers that have been in ancient times and in modern times. So we're going to begin the session with some breathing meditation. So if we get comfortable, whether it's on a chair or on the floor, nice straight back. Take a deep breath. We raise our shoulders and let them relax with a sigh and let our body soften and relax. We either close our eyes or close them halfway. Our head's just looking up, we're just looking down the bridge of our nose. If we put our head too low, then we'll get very sleepy. If it's too high, we'll get quite agitated. We hold our hands so with the thumbs at the tip together, with the right and the left, and the tips together. Then our elbows slightly away from the torso, which also prevents us getting sleepy. And then we rest our tongue on the roof of the mouth, which will also help prevent the build-up of saliva, and which could be a distraction and interruption. So that's what we're trying to do, is minimise, get ourselves into like the ultimate position to prevent any interruptions and maximise our ability to meditate. So we're just going to begin with doing some breathing meditation, and then we'll analyse the quality of our mind. So we just either watch our breath, either rising and falling at the diaphragm or the upper chest, whichever you feel most comfortable. And some people like to watch the breath as it enters and exits the nostrils. So whichever of those three works best for you. And then before we do our meditation, we determine approximately how long we're planning to meditate. If we're doing it at home, or in a session, a daily session, or 3 times a week. And then we just bring our concentration inwards and focus it very gently on the breath. We just let go of all the other thoughts that we've been having about the day and what's coming up during the week, any worries, any daydreams, any feelings, any sensations. These are just mere distractions from our concentration. And with a little small part of our mind, we can label any of those thoughts or feelings, or something we might hear or smell, as distractions, and move our mind and our concentration as strongly as possible back to the breath. This is to help our mind gain as much spaciousness as possible and a sense of calm. So now now we're going to get another small part of our mind to help us with distraction and count the breath from 1 to 10. So 1 is an in-breath and an out-breath combined. And then we do this right through to number 10 and start again. If during that time we become distracted, we simply go back to number 1 again. No remonstrations if we don't get it right the first time, just gently starting again until we do. This is one of the excellent tools for settling our mind. Creating a good imprint, and even if we don't feel it at the time, some more spaciousness. Now we're going to change our object of concentration and focus just on the out-breath. And as we breathe out, we will visualize that we breathe out all of our problems, any unhappiness, any suffering in the form of black light or black smoke, which disappears into space. Choose the image you prefer, and then focus on letting go of anything that is causing concern or challenge at this present time. This black light or black smoke appears as black light or black smoke, but is actually any sickness or causes of sickness, problems, anxieties, irritation, or even the slightest agitation. Bad memories about times we've been hurt, any resentment, times we think that we might have failed, and any accompanying feelings of limitation about our capacity. Each time we breathe out, we see all of these sources of suffering leave our body and our mind until they are completely cleaned out of all of these obscurations. Even the slightest tension evaporates. Our body feels more relaxed. Our mind feels clearer, more pure. More aware, more free, more peaceful, relaxed. So next we focus just on the in-breath. We imagine that each time we breathe in, then we take in brilliant white light from the universe. This radiant white light appears as white light, but it is actually all good qualities and causes of happiness, such as pleasure, joy, good health, love, compassion, patience, generosity, and wisdom. With each breath, our body and mind is filled with light. And all of these qualities until we are completely full. Then we imagine that our body is no longer solid and heavy and prone to disease or illness, but is light-natured and radiant. We imagine that the brilliant white light filling our body and mind extends. In this way, they also experience all good qualities and causes of happiness: joy, good health, long life, and positive states of mind, such as concentration, clarity, patience, generosity, compassion, love. So when you're ready, if you would like to release your concentration. And so now we'll explore some of more of the Buddha's ideas for developing a calmer and more amiable life and how to achieve that. So we've talked in recent weeks about some of the qualities of happiness, such as great love and great compassion and bodhicitta and the 6 perfections of patience and generosity, concentration, and so on. However, there are various hurdles we need to address before we really develop these qualities. And when we experience discomfort, most of us just want to stop the pain as quickly as possible. But what happens is that many of us, and certainly at some point in our lives, we've looked in all the wrong places. And so, we might look to the comfort of extra food, the distraction of television and movies, holidays at the beach or mountains when possible, or even in these times dreaming and planning for them. Various substances such as alcohol, ultra fitness, deep and meaningful relationships, or friends, great jobs, powerful positions, more money, and so on. There's many more of them. But so none of these are inherently wrong and sometimes very useful with good motivation. But all of these generally bring us very temporary satisfaction, and sometimes for hours and sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, but never permanently. And depending on our approach and attitudes, too often too much suffering. So if we want really more substantive happiness and benefit, we need to get to the core of the suffering and discover what is really going on and address the main issues. So the essence of what the Buddha discovered on his inner journey began with what is known as the Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering. He decided he would forsake his very luxurious life and what could be done about it, and what can bring the kind of stable and more permanent happiness and peace of mind that he really experienced for himself in early years. 6 years of austerities, meditating in the forest, he demonstrated that it's important to put in great effort into achieving what is known as full awakening or enlightenment. So he attained, in that 6 years, he attained perfect concentration on calm abiding, rising only very briefly to pacify his father, who had been quite strongly opposed to his father's decision to become a monk, and who came to visit him one time. So after arising, after completing the 6 years in the forest as an ascetic with very little food or drink, he took some food at the insistence of some young followers. He then travelled to the very famous location, city of Bodh Gaya, where he famously meditated under the Bodhi tree, vowing, which is still there today, and a holy site, a very, very holy site. And he vowed not to leave this site until he had achieved his full awakening. So the story of the Buddha then explains that Siddhartha faced, in his final stages of becoming a fully awakened, he faced some very frightening visions or apparitions in his quest to find the meaning of suffering and a path out of suffering. And negativities and dark forces really tried to prevent his full awakening. But with the power of meditative stabilisation, he was very, he'd already understood very strongly about great love. He transformed these apparitions or visions into the vision of weapons. He had the vision of weapons coming at him, and could have easily become quite upset, but instead he transformed these into flowers in his mind, and the temptation of very beautiful young women into very elderly people that he would not be, as a young man, so attracted to. So he remained very unaffected by the delusions and totally defeated these dark and negative states of mind. So at age 35, he became fully enlightened. He wondered at first what he could do about that, and whether anyone would understand what he was talking about, and whether there was any potential for disciples in this already quite degenerated era. And but requests were made to him, and he began teaching with this very first teaching of the Four Noble Truths at Varanasi. The Buddha then taught very extensively throughout India, based on the 12 links of dependent origination and so on, and countless students followed his example, and he achieved enlightenment before the Buddha passed into a state of meditative equipoise at 80 years old. So in his teaching life from 35 to 80, he attracted thousands and thousands of followers who were very interested in everything that he had to teach and say. So this Four Noble Truths is a really special teaching, and we'll just do a kind of introduction to it today. It underpins all that followed, and still does for the many varieties of Buddhists around 2,600 years ago. So it's a very special teaching, the Four Noble Truths. So how it goes in summary is great love and great compassion are essential features of Mahayana teachings. But to truly understand this Buddhist view of compassion, we really need to have some insight into suffering. So we need to get a really, really good understanding of what the suffering really is. And there's many, many different teachings explaining suffering in quite a lot of detail. So this is because the essence of compassion is the wish to release, ourselves and others from suffering. So therefore we must first understand what this focus on suffering really is all about. So this is why the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. So the first of these truths is known as the truth of suffering, and this means that we're all caught up in an endless cycle of life and death called samsara, or cyclic existence. So we don't live in a place, we don't actually live in a place that is called samsara, and sometimes people kind of slightly misuse the term. It's really our experience of the world that is samsaric, and how we view our experiences within the world. So it's easy to sort of say that this is samsara, but it's actually coming from our mental imprints of how we view the world. So cyclic existence is when we have we have negative imprints or we have positive imprints, and we just keep going through the same cycle of them repeating themselves until we decide that we want to do something to cut through that. So that's really why it's called cyclic existence. So we may come to a point where say, well, I've had enough of this. I want to find a set of teachings or a method that will help me get out of my obvious habit of repeating the same mistakes over and over again, and having the same patterns, which we've probably done lifetime to lifetime. So the Buddha explains in the First Noble Truth that life is full of suffering, and there's illness and there's poverty and disease and old age and death, and we cannot keep what we like, and we cannot avoid what we don't like. We can't always get what we want, and that's especially true in this time, in this COVID era. We see that very clearly. And many times we lose what we already have, and again, that's being demonstrated very clearly, sadly, for some people in this era, that they've had a lot and they may not be able to hang on to it. And we hope that's not true, but that is very likely in many cases. In a lot of cases of people who've really suffered through these times. Also, everything is always changing, and many times we feel really lonely and sad by the sudden changes in the circumstance, that it's quite hard to deal with so much change going on, and it affects us, even at quite subtle levels, to be able to actually cope with this amount of change. So if this is all we know, then we suffer a great deal. So the opposite to that, when we free ourselves of all of this mental suffering that comes from all of these different types of sufferings, is known as nirvana. So that is the opposite of samsara, and having a mind that experiences the world and all the things that happen to us and all the circumstances that happen to us in a much more positive way. So the second of the Four Noble Truths is the true source of suffering. So the Buddha explained that what he had found was that true source of suffering is our mental habits. And according to the concept of the true source of suffering, our habits are based on what is known as karma and delusion. And another word for delusions are negative states of mind or negativities, which we have talked about before, like anger and pride and jealousy and grasping. So delusions have got a definition, which has been given by Geshe Loden in his Path to Enlightenment books. And it says delusions are defined as mental factors that, when generated, cause our mental continuum to be unpeaceful. And they've got lots of other names. They can be called afflictions or defilements, negative minds or contaminated minds. They cause the mind to become unpeaceful. And of course, we want peace. So these are not helpful states of mind. And so this is the cause of our suffering, and why most of us, not everybody, but most of us find it quite difficult to meditate for long periods of time. Our minds become very busy and unpeaceful because of all of these negativities that arise, some that we see really clearly and others that are really hidden. And an example obviously would be such as wanting so many things without good motivation. So that's just one, and we gave a lot of examples before. So Geshe Loden explains is that we all have what is known as the 5 aggregates. Now that's a big subject, and I won't go into too much detail now, but in summary, these are form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. And the 5 aggregates of an ordinary person, which are contaminated by our delusions and our karma, push us from life to life. So just in Buddhism, karma literally means action and implies cause and result. For example, an example of that is, and there are many examples explained in the Path to Enlightenment's books. For example, if we are generous, this can bring various types of wealth in future lives, while anger is the cause of being born in a place of great disharmony and unrest. So there are 2 examples of what happens with our karmic imprints. So without any intervention, the delusions continue to arise, creating more negative karma and continued suffering. So that's what we want to do, is that we actually want to cut through our cyclic existence and our continued repeating of the bad habits, and to intervene. So we want to intervene. So that's why we have what is known as this really golden opportunity by having some experience of these teachings, and if we're really interested in them, taking them up in a more deep way to actually intervene in our habit patterns and intervene in cyclic existence. So this is really what samsara is this cyclic existence with all of these deluded habits that we really want to get rid of. And this is the real essence of our renunciation, and deciding that we don't want to do that anymore. We're not keen on that anymore. We would like to break the cycle and to be free from samsara and to be free from such bondage, and to have a much freer and better oriented and more positive mind. So that is what the Buddha meant by true source of suffering. We know that we've already spoken a number of times about the different types of delusions, but there are 6 of the most common ones, and these are known as the root delusions. And Geshe-la describes them as attachment, anger, ignorance, pride, doubt, and deluded view. And these are the source of all of our suffering. That is a summary of them. So when we have gained a complete understanding of samsara through contemplation, and it's useful to actually contemplate the various sufferings that are described in meditations and other path books, we can generate, it helps us to generate this energy and enthusiasm to end our suffering, abandon and end our suffering. And also it is also going to put us in a much better position to help other people as well. So it is said that when our attitude is in a really, really good place, in understanding the true source of suffering, our attitude will be like the person caught in a house that is raging with fire. So to have this kind of mind where we say, nah, I've had enough of this, I have to get out of here right now. That's the kind of attitude that we're trying to cultivate by focusing on the true source of suffering, as explained by the Buddha and the many great teachers and the hundreds of and thousands of great teachers since then. So the third of the 4 Noble Truths is true cessation. And this is peace, is bringing, once we've made this decision and to have applied this energy, enthusiasm to get out of this very unpleasant state, is to develop peace through knowledge. It's our listening and our thinking and our meditating and the pacification of the mind. It's a belief that we can actually be free of this suffering, that there are methods that we can apply to stop the suffering. It's a big job, but when we achieve this liberation from our delusions, we reach what is known as this very blissful state of nirvana. And this is liberation from both our delusions and our karma. So this gives us, again, as I said, it's not, nirvana is not a place, it's not an actual place, but it is a state of the mind. And it's a permanent release from all of these delusions, which when we really spend some time analysing and thinking about what these delusions are and what they really mean and how they're really impacting us and impacting others, is something that we will want to get out of, and we will want to move our mind towards a much more blissful and peaceful state as reflected in nirvana. So finally, the fourth of the 4 Noble Truths is true path. And this is when we compare the painful experience of cyclic existence with what is possible, then we'll be highly motivated to practice a path and to be free of negative mental habits based on karma delusion, and to gain a really deep awareness and realizations, and ultimately a perfect state of enlightenment. So eventually, step by step, if we meditate consistently and strongly on the path of cessation, all of these delusions and any negative karmic imprints will evaporate and there'll be no trace left. So, as a result, along the way, many wonderful things will happen. We will naturally think about other people. We will naturally think about benefit to ourselves and others. We will naturally collaborate. We will be unbelievably peaceful and happy. So many good qualities arise from the suffering, which is, the symbol of the lotus coming from the muddy pond. So then we have made this decision that we no longer want to live with a mind that is caught up by the negativities of samsara, that we want to break our cyclic existence, and that we then want to develop all of these positive qualities and become a great benefit to ourselves and others. So this is the fourth of the Noble Truths. So many qualities. That's a snapshot to give you an idea of the Four Noble Truths and develop a commitment, if you like, to get rid of our negative minds. So another aspect of Buddhist teachings that Geshe Loden often taught is equanimity. So I thought I would touch base on equanimity this afternoon. So Geshe said, and he taught this a lot, that much of our suffering is caused by our own biased mind, harbouring attachment for our friends and aversion for our enemies, so to speak. And enemies can include anyone that we'll use the term enemies, but that's anyone that we have negativity towards or dislike a bit or feel frightened of in any way. We'll call them the enemies. So when we develop this equanimity, this is also a really great contributor to more peace and happiness. So it provides also a really stable foundation for our practice. And so just like, a really uneven slab or uneven foundation for our house will cause the house to be really unstable in future times. So we need to build a really good, stable foundation based on minds like love and compassion and overcoming any bias or discriminations. So there's a few different ways to look at equanimity, and again, it's it's a very profound subject. But just to summarise, so we can begin by looking at equanimity from the point of view of the subject, and that's us. We're the subject. So if we look at equanimity, there are three groups that we can categorise people in, and there's some many good meditations on this as well. So we can consider one group as being strangers. And these are beings or people that we feel neutral or totally indifferent towards, which is the vast majority of people and other living beings. So strangers tend to be the object of our indifference or our ignorance. They are generally strangers because they have neither benefited us nor harmed us. And when we encounter or we meet a stranger, we generally remain bored and quite uninterested. And this then strengthens our ignorance. Just a little anecdote to illustrate how this is not necessarily useful is the approach of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When he meets him, if anyone's had that great opportunity of how he is with crowds of people, he always approaches people as though they're all his friends and that he has a connection with them. And he talks about that he sees everybody in that way. So most of us don't have the capacity to do that. And when we don't know someone, we don't make any effort or even think in our mind about being kind to that person, not necessarily overtly, because that might look a bit odd, but feeling kind, at the very least, feeling kindly towards them. And His Holiness is quite remarkable to observe in that regard. how he treats everybody so beautifully. So the second group, from the point of the subject, us, is friends. So that's groups of relatives, friends, or anyone that we care for and that have helped us. And if we analyse the process, we will find that friends become friends because they like us, or they praise us, or they do things that with a delusion of attachment. And over time, it brings its own suffering. And then, of course, we talked about enemies, but that's anyone towards whom we have any harsh or hurtful feelings or find it difficult to communicate with. So it's a little bit hard for us. And generally, they're people who don't like us that much, and they criticise us, they give us a hard time, they do things that we find really unpleasant, doesn't match the way we feel about the world, and it can be quite uncomfortable. And so we can become either uncomfortable or a bit depressed or fearful and agitated. And our irritation or our discomfort is aggravated, which brings us further suffering. So we have negative thoughts about that person. They may just simply be our projections, but that is the way we feel. So as a result of these various experiences of people and the way we categorise them, which does move around, our mind is creating an agitation in itself. So it's moving the mind up and down as we do this categorisation. It's becoming quite confused and it's becoming quite agitated. Therefore, it's very difficult to express much happiness within ourselves when there's so much going on, let alone to develop any really loving bodhicitta or compassion or love towards people. So by meditating on equanimity, the idea is to challenge the validity of these categories of people, of friend, enemy, and stranger, and break them down, establishing the mind that is in a beautiful state of equanimity towards everybody. And these propositions can be sometimes seen in our own lives, so that it does move around in our own lives. So we can find that we can have a very good friend, but something bitter, or someone we're really unhappy with, someone we hardly knew, like a stranger, can suddenly become a really close friend because of various circumstances that have shifted. We've barely known them. We might have seen them at a distance, but different circumstances arise and they suddenly become a really good friend. And even, even a rival can be won over and become a family favourite. So we can just imagine, in Buddhism we believe in reincarnation and multiple lives. So if relationships within our own lives change in such a short span, then imagine how many of those relationships are shifting around over various numbers of lifetimes. Therefore, the study and practice of equanimity would contend, as explained by Geshe-la, is that there really is no logic in simply helping friends, ignoring strangers and dismissing enemies, because at one time or another they have all played a different part in our life, and they've helped, hindered or ignored us. All such discriminations on the basis of friend, enemy and stranger are in fact completely invalid when we analyse it properly. And the reality is that they should all be seen as equal, and we can make the commitment not to discriminate between any of them, which will help bring us a more peaceful peaceful approach to dealing with all different kinds of people that come into our lives. So when we've equalised our attitude towards all different people and living beings through these forms of analysis, we can concentrate single-pointedly on the resultant feeling of equanimity, and there's some terrific meditations to help us do that. However, our mind can also be very tricky, and we can easily find out, yeah, that sounds really well and good, but I'm here now and I've been shown lots of kindness by this particular group of people and lots of negativity and harm by another group of people in this life. So actually, the real source of the harm is ignorance and anger, and we should not really hold a grudge against anybody who has harmed us. So categorising these people as friend, enemy, stranger, helper, detractor is not really very sensible when we think that every living being wishes for more happiness and less suffering. So despite wishing to be free from suffering, everyone continues to experience suffering. So the logic in this case is that every living being is equally wanting more happiness and less suffering. So to categorise people as being more helpful and more supportive and really mean is not really logical either. So in fact, we all share that common humanity. So if this is true, if every living being is equal in wanting more happiness, why would we discriminate as to who is worthy of our loving wish for their happiness and who is not? Why would we do that? Would we go into a nursing home, for example, and full of older people, and they're all got various illnesses, and they're each needing care and attention? What sort of discrimination would we make in that case? That would not seem to be very reasonable. So if we accept the premise that all living beings, in fact, are suffering like we are and all want happiness, then why do we discriminate on the basis of this fragile circumstances of this life's flimsy relationships? So if we reflect on this for a while and think about this, we would question whether it's really such a noble endeavour to only help those who have helped us. Those emotions equal. So in thinking that everyone is suffering the same as me with all of these 6 root delusions, then why would we at this point discriminate on the basis of that they have more suffering or less suffering? And so we need to be practicing compassion, not judgment, when we encounter various living beings. So in summary, equanimity is a profound practice and well worth exploring in more depth to enable us to bring this kind of peace and happiness in our lives through not discriminating between enemy and friend and stranger, and recognising that every human being is suffering just the same as we are, and therefore there is no logic in discriminating between one person and another. And it doesn't mean to say that we have to walk up to every person in the shopping centre. It's about an underlying mental attitude. It's about when we do have an engagement, for example, if we're in a shop and we're engaging with the person at the counter, or if we have any number of engagements in our lives, that we don't apply this lack of this discrimination against one person as opposed to another, and that we continuously seek to be as kind and as peaceful and respectful, and apply all the various positive aspects of a good Dharma practice and positive minds to all the people that we meet. And this in turn will bring us more peace and happiness. So that is the benefit of having a mind of equanimity towards enemies, friends and strangers, and not continuously categorising, and recognising that when we do that, in fact. So another really wonderful thing to do from time to time on this path to enlightenment, which is no small journey, is that we may need some inspiration. So one of the wonderful things that we can do read and contemplate about the lives of the great teachers, and that can be an excellent way to inspire our practice of as we're going along this journey. And there are many ancient examples and many modern examples as well. And here's just a few, a sample of just a few of the stories of great teachers and great bodhisattvas, as we call them, which is sort of similar to saints. And one of these is Milarepa. So early in his life, the great Tibetan master Milarepa, he caused enormous harm to many people in his village who had wronged him. And he later regretted these actions and very deeply, and set on a path to find a way through this. And he found a marvellous teacher by the name of Mapa Lotsawa. But he had to, in his experiences with Mapa Lotsawa, Mapa actually wouldn't teach him at first. And he set him on many difficult tasks to help him clear his negative karma, because he had a great deal of negative karma to clear. Eventually, he was able to receive teachings, and by doing extensive meditation and study, he purified his negative actions completely, and he was able to gain enlightenment in this life. So the energy and enthusiasm with which he had applied his negative minds, he then applied to becoming really positive, and he eventually gave many teachings himself, and his story is especially inspiring. If you come across the songs of Milarepa and his biography, it's really worth reading. Then another of the great bodhisattvas, Asanga. So one of the most profound teachings of Buddhism is that all living beings have Buddha potential, which I will touch on a little bit later. And everyone can change, everyone can reach nirvana, everyone can be happy, everyone can get rid of delusions and suffering, and everyone can become like Shakyamuni Buddha, totally at ease, totally wise, and perfectly equipped to assist others. So these teachings about Buddha potential are especially promoted by this very famous teacher, Asanga, who was born 900 years after Shakyamuni Buddha. So Asanga was born at a time when the Buddhist teachings were very weak in India, and there had been religious wars at this time. So his mother had previously been a nun, and his father was a king, and she brought him up to become a spiritual person, and he took to his life, his spiritual life, with great zeal. So he obviously had the strong imprint to do that. Asanga had a strong wish to see the great Buddha Maitreya through the strength of his meditation practice. So he decided to go into solitary retreat for a period of 12 years. After 3 years, he was discouraged, and he'd been, meditating away and still not seen Maitreya. So he was actually very discouraged by this and decided to leave the cave. But as he was leaving the cave, he noticed some birds entering and leaving their nest had worn down a rock. And he thought to himself, if these birds' feathers have smoothed down the rocks over the years as they enter and left the nest, then I can remove the obstacles to my own obstacles to seeing Maitreya, and I will continue with my meditation practice. So this happened again after 6 years, and a similar story, and again after 9 years. So he again had other experiences that made him realise that he needed to apply patience. So after a total of 12 years, Asanga thought, this is really it. I've actually had enough of this. I've not even had one dream. It's been 12 years, and I've not even had one dream of Maitreya, let alone a clear vision. So on leaving the cave, Asanga came across a very sick dog that was suffering very much from maggots eating into its flesh. The dog was still alive, but it was crying really pitifully from the pain, and Asanga felt enormous compassion for this poor dog. He didn't know what to do about it because he didn't want to hurt, also didn't want, through his compassion, to hurt the maggots. So he decided that he would, the only thing that he could do was to lift the maggots off with his tongue, that he wouldn't damage the maggots but also help relieve the dog. So what happened is that as he knelt down, the mangy animal then transformed into Maitreya. So Sangha was a little bit upset about this and very surprised. Maitreya, but the strength of Asanga's mental obscuration and the strength of Asanga's mental obscurations had actually prevented him from seeing Maitreya. So now the strength of his compassion towards both the dog and to the maggots had actually lifted all of those obstructions, and he was able to see Maitreya really, really clearly. And this is really an example of how that developing this kind of positive mind, this very, very strong positive mind, as Asanga did, was able to create this great purification to see something, the aspect of us as having the sight of Maitreya, the future Buddha. Another very beautiful Buddhist story is that of Nagabodhi. So, for example, in Buddhist philosophy, it is said that if we read texts or recite prayers aloud, then animals and insects are able to, animals in particular, are able to accumulate some form of positive karma because they receive this imprint, and this will potentially ripen for them, and they'll have an opportunity in a future life to experience the Dharma. So an example of this occurred with the great Indian Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, who was in the regular habit of reciting the sutras and prayers aloud each day. A pigeon that lived in the roof of the house heard the sounds of the Dharma each day for a number of years until it eventually passed away. The pigeon was then reborn as a child of a couple, according to the story, who lived in as a child to a couple who lived in India, according to the story, and they lived in India. So one day the child told the parents that he wished to visit his guru. The parents were quite puzzled by this, but they asked who this guru was, and the boy responded that it was Nagarjuna. His parents eventually took the child to meet Nagarjuna, and the great bodhisattva or saint told him that the child had been the pigeon in a previous life, and the boy received teachings from Nagarjuna. He gave him the name Nagabodhi, and Nagabodhi became one of Nagarjuna's main disciples and a great Buddhist teacher in his own right. It's a very beautiful story. So in more modern times, we've got these very inspiring teachers, such as His Holiness, who inspires people all over the world. And he lost his country in 1959, leaving behind millions of people who had died and others who are really suffering. No choice in this matter, but since then he has continued to work peacefully and tirelessly for more than 60 years for peace and to explain the benefits of Dharma practice and Tibetan Buddhist practice to millions and millions of people throughout the world, and to also support the Tibetan people. So even at 85, he's continuing throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. He's continuing to teach and give online teachings and answer questions, and he's inspiring thousands as he does this. So he is really the embodiment in this modern times of one of his most famous sayings, never give up, and one of the most revered people on the planet today. Also in modern times, our own founder of the Tibetan Buddhist Society, Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodin, and spiritual leader until his passing in August 2011, continuously addressed the needs of the world in so many different ways. He was, explaining Buddhism, community leadership, environment, national development, and international issues. And drawing from his 9 internationally acclaimed books, which are now used by students and teachers throughout the world, and as the basis of the transmission of his teachings, Geshe asked that Buddhists embrace non-violence and freedom and peace. And with the deepest respect, he appealed to all the great religious traditions of the world to take on common values, love and compassion and charity as a basis for harmony. He wanted all leaders, religious, political, business or communal, to be wise, well-intended and above all honest, often highlighting the great examples to follow in Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In the face of climate change, and we're talking nearly 10 years ago, Geshe promoted care for the environment through the use of clean energy, solar, wind or hydro, and a water strategy including recycling, the means used for the care of the Tibetan Buddhist Society gardens. He wanted the nations of the world to move away from the destruction and waste of human life resulting from any military interventions, to balance rich and poor, developing and developed. He prayed for the end of any military occupations from the Gaza to Tibet so that every person may enjoy the type of freedom that we've enjoyed up until very recently here in Australia. These are all great teachers and very inspiring. Really inspiring to read their stories, which gives us the kind of nourishment that we need to continue on our journey. And the reason for this is that one of the most important things that we need to remember is that we all have the potential to be just the same. It's one of the foundation teachings of Buddhist practice, is that we all have Buddha potential. So this potential is really hidden from us, and so reflecting on this underlying nature of consciousness really enables us to recognise our potential. So generally we feel really limited in terms of who we are and what we can do and what we can know. So we might, for example, feel that we're not really able to develop great compassion towards all living beings, because we can't feel any kindness towards those who have harmed or criticised us in the past. If there is someone we don't get on with, it can seem to be totally impossible to have goodwill towards them, as we are always uncomfortable when they're around. Or we might feel that we can never, ever develop clear concentration because our mind is always feeling so agitated and stressed or worried. There is never a time, for example, when there isn't something to worry about. The sense of limitation arises because we don't recognise the potential within us. So Geshe taught that the nature of our mind is clear and knowing. That is the actual nature of our mind and the potential of our mind. It simply knows objects, like a mirror reflects what is put in front of it. Mind reflects or knows all the perceptions, thoughts and feelings that appear to it. So this nature of mind that we all possess, according to the great teachers, stretching back 2,600 years, almost 2,600 years, this nature of mind is never polluted or stained by negative thoughts and feelings. It is like gold that may be covered in dirt, but it doesn't actually corrode. So it's like you can liken it to an expansive blue sky that might be obscured by clouds, but it is always sitting there behind the clouds, this blue sky. So our Buddha potential is like that, it is the beautiful blue sky behind the clouds. So no matter how persistent our delusions are, whether they're anger or jealousy or impatience, or whatever our delusion is, the nature of our mind remains pure and unpolluted, and it is simply knows objects. So since our mind has this capacity to know any object, then there is actually no reason, there are no limitations, that we can, of course, know patience and loving kindness or great compassion instead of worry, irritation, and stress. So there's no or inbuilt restriction that prevents us from developing the causes of future happiness and all positive states. It's not an intrinsic obstacle that prevents us from eliminating all the causes of unhappiness and the negative states of mind. So then there is developed potential. So that's our potential, our Buddha potential, and then we have developed potential. So well as the nature of the mind being pure, we also have the seeds of all good qualities within our mind. So we have those seeds there now within our mind streams. So every time in the past that we have expressed and acted with generosity, with action, with patience, with ethics and love and compassion, we've actually already made an imprint on our mind. Whenever we've made the effort to develop some concentration or wisdom, we've planted latencies or positive potentials within our mind stream. And so through the practice of meditation, these can be nurtured and developed into all good qualities and happiness. So we have planted those seeds already, and it is now the opportunity to actually nurture and grow them. So a recent quotation from His Holiness really summarises this very well. He said, "Buddha nature exists in everyone, no matter how deeply it may be covered by attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Buddha nature cannot be lost or destroyed, and when all defilements are removed, sooner or later it will appear." So that's a good place to finish on some of the ideas for a more peaceful life, and explore more equanimity, being inspired by the great teachers, recognising our Buddha potential, are all methods that we can think about exploring within the Buddhist philosophy to actually move our minds into a much better and happier place and towards an enlightened state. So we're going to conclude this series with another beautiful meditation that was bestowed by Geshe Loden, and that is the Rose Meditation. So if you can get yourself back into your meditation position with a nice straight back, head slightly forward, eyes closed gently, and so. Just focusing on the breath for a minute. We start this meditation by imagining that the ground is soft and smooth. Now we imagine that white roses arise from the ground. White roses have hundreds of petals and a beautiful perfume and radiate white light. The white light flows through your body and brings with it relaxation, peace, tranquility, and the complete healing of body and mind. Focus our mind on this visualization of the beautiful white roses, the healing white roses. Now imagine that the white roses transform into yellow roses. They have so many petals and a beautiful perfume and radiate warm yellow light. This yellow light flows throughout your body, and in doing so, increases your happiness, well-being, and fulfillment. Mind on this beautiful visualization of the yellow roses. If your mind wanders off, gently bring it back to the roses' warm yellow light. The yellow roses then transform into red roses with hundreds of petals and a beautiful perfume. They radiate red light. This red light flows throughout your body. The energy of love, energy of compassion, the energy of enthusiastic perseverance. Focus your mind on the bright red glow of the red roses. If it wanders off, gently bring it back to the visualization. The red roses then transform into blue roses, having lots and lots of petals and a beautiful perfume. They radiate blue light. This blue light flows throughout your body, completely removing any problems, worries, illness, and bad conditions. Focus your mind on this visualization of the beautiful blue roses. Your mind wanders away, gently bring it back to the visualization. Then in recognition of the effort of this meditation and this class, we can dedicate any positive energy we have created towards more happiness in our lives, more good conditions, better health, and also happiness and good conditions for the people that we love, and if we like, for all living beings. When you are ready, then release your concentration. So in summary, we need tools and persistence to discover our own Buddha nature. Regular practice, however small, is the key. We start with short periods of breathing meditation, 3 to 5 times a week, then perhaps take on an analytical meditation like developing compassion or dealing with anger. So this living philosophy of the path to enlightenment, taught initially by Tsongkhapa, Tsongkhapa, and offered to West others, gathers all of the essential points from the vast range of the Buddha's discourse into the progressive stages of spiritual practice. So studying and contemplating the subjects of the graduated path to enlightenment is extraordinarily beneficial, and we learn to see and experience the world very differently through our awakening and extraordinary perspective of enlightenment. So the graduated path is explained in 2 of our classes. We do an overview, which has happened in this course classes. We do an overview, which has happened in this course over the last 5 weeks. And then we also do a more detailed course at 4 o'clock on a Sunday. So if you're interested in learning more about Tibetan Buddhism, we will have a new introduction series with a different teacher commencing at 1:30 on Sunday, the 18th of October. Alternatively, you might like to join the Path to Enlightenment classes at 4 o'clock on a Sunday, and where you'll learn each of these topics that we give an overview of in the introduction series. You'll learn about them in a lot more detail and analysis. So thank you very much for joining us today, and anybody who's joined the full course, thank you too, and look forward to seeing you hopefully in the future, and enjoy your week ahead. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Chris. All the best. Thank you, Manakam. Marvellous, good support.
Oh, thank you.